name is Colleen Crawford, and today we are going to discuss social judgment theory. Muzafer Sherif, in the 1950s, he was a researcher, and he and his colleagues came to use the autokinetic effect, and they took a group of people and they put them in a dark room. And then they had a small pinpoint of light appear in the room. And some of the people would say, oh, it moved this way and that way, and some of the other people said, oh, no, it moved another way and then over there. And by the end of the time that the group had together in this room, they came to agree upon a method of movement that the light had. And so one person's opinion affected the other until they came to a conclusion. Well, Sherif thought this was very interesting, and he wondered if this had something to do with the way in which we change our beliefs over time, and how we perceive and handle messages that we hear, and then how it can affect our belief system. Steve Booth Butterfield is a writer of the HealthyInfluence.com website. And he has a teaching background, and he, as a teacher, and we've probably all seen them or heard them, maybe even have been one yourself, there would be a parent who, maybe during a PTO meeting or a PTA meeting, they would become very irate and very upset and emotional, and maybe even storm out of the room due to the subject that was being spoken about. They felt very affected by what was happening. Well, social judgment theory can help us come to understand just exactly what was going on with that person, or maybe when you feel that way yourself, when you hear something and you have a reaction to it. Steve Booth Butterfield, he wrote up a very good and clear explanation of the social judgment theory on his website, HealthyInfluence.com. And there are 5 principles to the theory, and then there are 3 zones in which we can target these 5 principles. Principle 1 is that we use categories of judgment to decipher and weigh influential messages by categorizing all the positions of a statement or argument. And so we can take a statement, and it can range from the far yay or agreement to the subject to the far nay or disagreement of the subject. And there are about 9 levels in between. So say, for instance, we had the subject, should we increase teachers' pay? We could start out at the far agreement position of the subject. And we might say something like, it is absolutely essential from all considerations that we should increase teacher pay. And then to the next position, it is almost certain from many angles that we should. Or it is highly probable that things would be better if we did. Or it is possible that it would be better if we did. And then about the middle spot, where we would say, it is difficult to say whether we should change or increase teacher pay. And then we go backwards all the way down to the very absolutely essential from all considerations that we should not change or increase teachers' pay. And then you take each of these levels and you can categorize it into a zone of latitude of acceptance, non-commitment, or rejection. And narrowing it down to that anchor position is important because that is the one level you are most comfortable with agreeing on. And so then this brings us to principle 2. Once we hear the message, we then decide where to put it in our categories of judgment. And then you can decipher how large is your arc of agreement or disagreement. So if we went back to the list, perhaps you would fall in one of these places toward the bottom where for your anchor position. And then, so you would have all that toward the top, and your arc of agreement would be very large, and your arc of disagreement would be small. So, principle 3 is where we discover what makes our arc of disagreement so small or large, or our arc of agreement big or small. What causes that to happen? And most of the time we don't even realize how we make these judgments. It's just, it feels like it's automatic. But what really is going on? Well, Steve Booth Butterfield, he, in his example of the teacher, that person was very upset and irate. And so he had a large ego involvement in the situation. And he said that with children and parents and as teachers, they have to be careful with those situations, because parents feel so much emotion and such a large connection with their children. For example, maybe an easy way to understand how your ego involvement would work would be, perhaps the government would decide that they want to decrease Social Security payments. Well, to a 60-year-old person, if you present that statement to them, they would be interested, because pretty soon they will be participating in Social Security payments. To a 75-year-old person, they are definitely interested in it because they are receiving the payments right now, and this will affect them. But if you take that same statement and you present it to a 20-year-old, that 20-year-old might not care very much at all, because it's going to be such a long time before they're even affected by it. So their ego involvement is very small compared to the 75-year-old person whose ego involvement in that type of statement is very large. And then Principle 4 states that we manipulate new statements that we hear to match our categories of judgment. For example, say you were in a room and it was 68 degrees and you were very comfortable, but then you went outside and you did some yard work or you did some exercise, and you came back into that same room that was 68 degrees, but now you're really hot and you're really, you're warm from the activity that you did outside. You might even go over to the thermostat and turn it down so that you feel better. Well, this can be related to where your anchor position falls in the list of levels. If the statement is close in proximity to your anchor position, you might distort what that statement is even a little bit, and agree with it even more than you really should, just to make it fit, because it's easier. And the opposite is true too. If the statement is sort of far away from your anchor position, you might distort that message and disagree with it even more strongly than you really should, just to make it fit because it's comfortable. Now, this part of Principle 4 is really interesting. So, these messages that just float into your anchor position, they really do no persuading at all. In order to persuade, a message must be chosen that is just the right distance from the hearer's anchor position in order to actually make a change. It has to be far enough away, but not too far, so that it's far enough away to be a little bit different, but not too far away so that you just totally don't disagree with it and you can hardly even hear the message. And so this brings us to Principle 5, which states that only small and moderate spaces between our anchor position and the new message will bring change. Large spaces will not make change happen at all, because there's too much emotion involved and you just disagree too much. So change usually happens slowly and over a long period of time because they're small. They come in small and moderate spaces from your anchor position. So if you are a speaker or a writer or a teacher, and you hold up these principles, these 5 principles of social judgment theory, and you keep that in mind when you're preparing your message, it could be a phenomenal tool if you want to really affect somebody and help them change their opinion.